Welcome back to Mind Lens. Tonight you've brought your mind into a space few dare to linger, where patterns become whispers and whispers become truths. The clock ticks gently in the background, the scent of old paper lingers in the air, and your thoughts settle like dust in a forgotten room. Outside, the night presses in softly, like velvet. And yes, your ego may not make it through what we're about to uncover, but then again, perhaps that's exactly the point. So, before we dive in, tap that like button and subscribe to Mind Lens, only if these midnight mind voyages truly speak to you. Let's see how far across the map of consciousness we stretch tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. There's a quiet, aching realization that creeps in some time between heartbreak and hindsight. Why do I keep ending up with the same kind of person? Not the same name, not the same face, but the same energy. They made you feel seen, at first. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, they made you feel like a ghost. The details change, but the dynamic doesn't. There's a familiarity to it, the way your nervous system reacts, the emotional highs and lows, the chase, the doubt. And you wonder, is this attraction or déjà vu? Carl Jung wouldn't call it coincidence. He'd call it unconscious repetition. He once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Fate. What a romantic word for being stuck in the same emotional maze over and over again. See, your unconscious isn't a vault of mystery. It's a library of emotional blueprints. It remembers how love felt the first time you understood it, even if that love was confusing, conditional, or silent. It remembers how safety looked, even if safety meant pleasing others, disappearing, or never asking for too much. And it remembers who gave you attention, even if it came with fear. So when you meet someone new and feel an unexplainable pull, it might not be chemistry, it might be recognition, not of them, but of the pattern they activate in you. You think, this one is different, and maybe they are. But if you haven't changed, if your unconscious blueprint is still running the show, you may be in for a painfully familiar story. This is the hidden machinery of emotional attraction. You are pulled toward people who fit the emotional mold you unconsciously learn to crave. Not because it's good for you, but because it's familiar. The unconscious doesn't seek healing, it seeks completion. Or more precisely, a second chance at the first wound. You replay the same dynamic hoping it will end differently, hoping someone will stay this time. Love you correctly, see you fully, but the same script rarely leads to a new ending, unless the actor, the you, learns their role was never theirs to begin with. So let's pause. Feel your breath. Let it enter slowly through your nose. Hold. Now release it, like letting go of the question. What's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you, but something is calling for your attention, something deep, old, wise even, though it's wearing the face of pain. This isn't about blaming yourself for choosing the wrong people. It's about seeing that sometimes what feels magnetic is actually what's been buried inside you all along. The pull isn't to them, it's to a forgotten part of you, and when you notice that, the story starts to shift. So you're lying there, the hum of the room around you fading into the soft rhythm of your own breathing, and perhaps, beneath the stillness, a question lingers. Why does this keep happening to me? Carl Jung had a way of answering questions like that, not directly, but by handing you a mirror you didn't know you were holding. He believed that underneath our daily selves, beneath the persona we wear for the world, there are ancient forces at work. Archetypes, not roles we play, but patterns we inherit. Not personalities, but psychic blueprints. Archetypes, Jung said, are like deep rivers under the surface of the psyche. You don't see them, but they shape the terrain of your life. You fall into them, you follow them. Sometimes you drown in them. One of these is the wound bond archetype. It's the hidden pattern that draws you toward someone who awakens, not your joy but your oldest pain, because your unconscious in its strange loyalty to your past still believes that healing lies in repetition. It's not love you seek. It's resolution, Closure. The fantasy of rewriting what was never written properly in the first place. This is why you may find yourself attracted to people who reflect a parent's neglect, a sibling's competition, or a caretaker's conditional affection. Even when your conscious mind says, "I don't want that," your unconscious replies, "But it's what I know." And what you know feels like home. Even if home hurt you. Jung didn't believe archetypes were bad. He believed they were inevitable. They are the internal compass we're all born with. But if we never examine who's guiding the compass, we don't realize we're walking in circles. Have you ever noticed how the same emotional tone creeps into new relationships? It might wear different clothing, have different hobbies, even different values. But the dynamic, it rhymes. That's not failure. That's a fingerprint of the archetype at work. And here's the paradox. The more unaware you are of the pattern, the more perfectly you repeat it. The more you insist, "This time is different," without pausing to ask, "Why does it feel familiar?" The more likely it is that you're not choosing. They are being chosen for you. By an older story. By a blueprint you didn't design. By an emotional equation that was scribbled down long before you had words. This is what Jung meant by making the unconscious conscious. It's not about fixing yourself, it's about noticing. The noticing creates a pause, and in the pause comes freedom. Let's try that now. Breathe in, slowly. Feel the tension in your shoulders. Let them drop as you exhale. Notice the part of you that's trying to figure it all out. You don't need to figure. You just need to see. Awareness doesn't erase the pattern immediately, but it makes it less automatic. You no longer get swept away unconsciously. You notice the tug. You remember the ache. And sometimes, that's enough to make a different choice. The hidden archetype is not your enemy. It's a message. And when heard, it becomes a guide instead of a ghost. Jung called this process individuation, the slow, unfolding path of becoming who you truly are, rather than who you were conditioned to be. And that journey doesn't begin with lightning. It begins here, in the quiet, with you, breathing, listening, unraveling one ancient thread at a time. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the thought land. What if I didn't choose them? Not really, not consciously. What if something older, quieter, more hidden inside you did? That's not an excuse. It's a doorway. Jung believed that much of what we call choice is actually selection by the unconscious, by familiar emotional patterns encoded into us long before we had language to resist them. And few choices reveal that mechanism as clearly as the people we fall for. Think about the last time you felt drawn to someone, not just impressed or curious, but magnetized. As if your body leaned in before your brain could catch up. It felt electric, charged, even a little dangerous. That's often not chemistry. That's a subconscious recognition. This person feels like something I've known before, and in many cases, they are. Not literally, of course, but emotionally, energetically. They resemble someone who shaped you early, often during times you had no control. Maybe they remind you of a mother whose love had conditions, or a father who was physically present but emotionally absent, or a sibling you had to compete with for space. It's not about blame, it's about wiring. Your inner world was shaped in that environment. You learned to identify closeness with unpredictability. You internalized the idea that love has to be earned, or chased. You learned that connection comes with intensity, not calm, and so your nervous system became fluent in emotional turbulence. When someone treats you gently, part of you may not even notice them. When someone plays hot and cold, part of you lights up, not because it feels good, because it feels familiar. This is the painful irony. You crave peace, but you bond through chaos. You want to be seen, but you're drawn to those who mirror your invisibility. You end up in cycles where your conscious mind says, "This isn't what I want," but your unconscious replies, "But this is what we do." So you justify. You try to change them. You try to prove your worth to them. You try to hold things together long enough for the ending to be different, but the unconscious isn't interested in happy endings. It's interested in reenactment. Until you notice. Let's take a breath here. Inhale deeply through your nose, hold for a count of 3, and exhale gently through the mouth, as if releasing someone else's expectations. Again. Slower this time. You are not broken, but your love map may be outdated, and it's not your fault if you've been following an emotional compass handed down to you by pain. The goal isn't to rip up that map. It's to unfold it carefully, look at its symbols, and understand who drew it, and why. Because once you see it, you can begin to redraw it. You begin to understand that the type of person who feels boring might actually be safe, that the relationship that lacks adrenaline might be the one that doesn't trigger your survival reflex, that silence doesn't always mean disconnection, it might mean peace, but that requires patience and a lot of self-honesty, because the moment you realize your attraction has been wired to dysfunction, you grieve, not just the people you lost, but the way you've been relating to love itself. And grief is the beginning of healing, Jung would say. The unconscious doesn't heal by being suppressed. It heals by being seen. And relationships are the mirror that never lies. So the next time your heart leaps, ask gently, do I feel drawn to them or to the story they represent? Sometimes that one question is the shift. You walk into a room, you lock eyes with someone, your heart doesn't race, it recognizes. Something about them feels like an echo. Not a spark, not a stranger, an echo. That echo is the past trying to write itself again. And not because the past was beautiful, but because it was unfinished. Jung understood this deeply. He saw the psyche as a system in motion, constantly seeking wholeness, especially through repetition. Not conscious repetition, not, I'll date someone just like my ex, but something quieter, subtler. The child within you still waiting for a different outcome. This is the compulsion to repeat. It's the psychic urge to re-enter the same emotional story, hoping that this time the ending will be different, that this time they'll stay, that this time you'll be enough, that this time you won't have to chase. It's not desperation, it's hope. A hope carried by your nervous system, your memory, your muscles, a hope that grew up with you, silent but faithful, waiting for someone who will rewrite the script. But here's the hard truth. You can't rewrite a story by casting the same characters, especially if they don't know they're in your story, especially if they have their own scripts, written in ink you've never seen. And so the wound reopens, not because you're weak, but because your psyche keeps knocking on the same emotional door, hoping anyone will finally open it with kindness. But maybe it's you who has to open it. Maybe the person you keep waiting for, to apologize, to stay, to understand, is a metaphor for a part of yourself you've exiled. Let that sink in for a moment. What if the unavailable person you're drawn to represents your own buried vulnerability? What if the emotionally distant partner mirrors how far you've drifted from your own needs? In this light, attraction becomes a map of the parts of you that are calling to be reclaimed, not just romantic longing. Psychic messaging. Let's breathe that in. Gentle inhale. Hold. Exhale. Slower than you want to. Release the need to rush through understanding. Some truths reveal themselves only in stillness. If you're caught in the same emotional loop, you are not broken. You are being summoned, not toward another person, but toward a version of yourself that's been patiently waiting to be chosen. By you, Jung never said healing was fast. He said it was honest. And in the honesty of recognizing your patterns, you begin to remember something sacred. You were never supposed to fix your past by reenacting it. You were supposed to witness it, feel it, and let it go, not to forget, but to stop carrying it into every new connection like a script you're obligated to perform. There's no shame in your longing, but it's time to ask, do you want love, or do you want closure disguised as love? That's a hard question, but you're brave enough to ask it now, because maybe the wound isn't asking for someone to come save you. Maybe it's asking for you to stop leaving yourself behind, and that is how the rewrite begins. By now you may be sensing it. That eerie pattern where every relationship feels like a new scene with the same unspoken script. The faces change, the names, the cities, the timelines, but the emotional landscape, somehow it repeats. Carl Jung called this the influence of the shadow, not evil, not monstrous, but hidden. The shadow isn't what's wrong with you. It's what's unlived in you. It holds the emotions you weren't allowed to feel, the truths you had to suppress, the instincts you were shamed for, and sometimes, the parts of you that were never mirrored back. When you bury your sadness, your shadow carries it. When you pretend to be okay, your shadow remembers that you're not. When you reject your anger, your shadow sharpens it and stores it for later. But here's where things get complicated. We don't just carry our shadows, we project them, often onto the people we're most drawn to, especially in love. You meet someone new. They trigger something deep, maybe an insecurity, maybe an old hurt. You don't know why, but you need them to see you, to prove something, to soothe something, to complete something. But what if what you're really chasing is the part of you you've abandoned? This is why Jung warned, be careful of those who make you feel too much too soon, because what you feel may not be about them. It might be your shadow recognizing a reflection, and it moves fast. It doesn't wait for logic. It just wants back in. We're not talking about bad people. We're talking about shadow matches. People who carry the energy you've been taught to deny, or people whose wounds echo yours so closely, it creates an illusion of intimacy. Trauma mirroring trauma. Pain disguised as passion. That's why it feels intense. That's why it burns out. That's why you're left wondering, what was that? Let's pause here. Place your hand on your chest. Feel the breath beneath it. Inhale. Hold. Exhale like you're letting go of someone who was never meant to stay. This is the secret Jung knew. You attract the shadow you haven't made peace with. You fall for the person who embodies the part of yourself you've neglected. And your unconscious believes, if you can get them to stay, maybe you're finally worthy. But healing doesn't happen through substitution. It happens through integration. That means turning inward, not to isolate, but to include, to say, I see you, anger. I hear you, sadness. I understand you, fear. I haven't forgotten you, tenderness. The more shadow you welcome, the less you seek it in others. You no longer crave validation from people who can't give it. You no longer pursue chaos because it's the only language your nervous system speaks. You stop falling in love with your own ghost, and then something strange and beautiful happens. Attraction begins to change. You stop feeling chemistry with those who would abandon you. You begin to notice a quiet pull toward those who feel steady, uncomplicated, clear. It won't be adrenaline, it'll be peace. And it might feel boring at first, until you realize that calm is what love actually sounds like when the shadow is no longer screaming. So if you keep meeting the same kind of person, ask, what part of me have I exiled that they are carrying for me? Bring it home. That's where it's always belonged. You've been told to be likable, to smile, to be kind, to be accommodating, flexible, agreeable. You've learned to become the version of yourself that others approve of, and maybe you've done it so well, you've forgotten where the act ends, and the real you begins. Jung called this your persona, the social mask you wear to function in the world. It's not fake, it's adaptive. It helps you survive, belong, succeed. But it can also become a prison, especially when it's so polished that even you believe it's all there is. And here's the twist. The persona doesn't just hide who you are, it also shapes who you attract. Because when you put forward only your best self, the agreeable one, the strong one, the funny one, the healer, the helper, you often attract people who need you to stay in that role. And so, a subtle contract is formed. You will give. They will take. You will listen. They will speak. You will stay steady. They will stay chaotic. You don't remember signing the contract, but your nervous system did. Long ago. You tell yourself, I'm just supportive. I'm just chill. I don't mind being the strong one, and maybe that's partly true. But here's the quiet truth buried underneath. You were never allowed to be anything but that. You became the caretaker because no one ever took care of you. You became the peacekeeper because conflict felt dangerous. You became low maintenance because your needs were never met anyway. And now, you're tired. Let's breathe here. A slow inhale. Hold. Exhale, as if releasing every time you said it's fine when it wasn't. Let your body feel how heavy the persona has become. The world may love your mask, but relationships built on masks always collapse. Not because you weren't lovable, but because they never saw the real you. Jung believed the persona is necessary, but temporary. A bridge, not a destination. And until you peel it back, you may keep attracting people who aren't relating to you. They're relating to your performance. They don't fall in love with your heart. They fall in love with your usefulness, with your patience, with your resilience, with the role you play for them. So when you finally show them your sadness, your fear, your boundaries, they recoil, not because you're too much, but because you broke the contract, and maybe that's what needs to happen. Because every time you betray yourself to keep someone, you're teaching your nervous system that your truth costs you connection. But what if the opposite were true? What if the more honest you become, the more clearly you see who can actually meet you? The persona isn't bad. It was built for protection. But protection, when left on too long, becomes armor. And armor, left on for too long, becomes isolation. So the next time someone seems drawn to you, ask, do they know me? Or do they only know my role? Because love that only survives the performance isn't love. It's an audience, and you weren't born to live on stage. Imagine yourself in a room as a child, not just any child, the younger you. The version of you before you had words for disappointment, before you knew how to make sense of silence, before you could tell the difference between attention and love. In that room, you learned more than just how to behave. You learned what to expect from connection. You learned what love looks like, and what it costs. And that learning didn't just stay in that room. It grew up with you. Carl Jung often pointed to the inner child, not as some abstract poetic device, but as a very real psychic presence, the emotional blueprint imprinted during your earliest, most impressionable years. If you had to earn affection, you may now equate love with effort. If you had to be the adult too soon, you may now attract people who need parenting. If you were punished for expressing need, you may now feel shame when asking to be held. And if you were ignored, you may now find comfort in emotionally unavailable partners. Not because they satisfy you, but because they match what you've always known. This isn't drama. This is programming. You are not weak for repeating patterns. You're loyal. Loyal to a map that once helped you survive. Loyal to the story you told yourself to make sense of pain. Loyal to the idea that maybe next time, if you do it right, you'll finally be loved fully. Let that land gently. You're not chasing love. You're chasing repair. But love that's chased out of a wound doesn't land gently. It stings. It pulls. It promises relief. Then mirrors abandonment. So how do you begin to untangle that? By noticing the first time it hurt, by tracing the echo back to its origin. Not to blame, but to understand. Ask yourself, what did I need that I didn't receive? What did I receive that I didn't need? What part of me shut down because it wasn't safe to stay open? This is the work Jung called shadow integration, the act of reclaiming what we buried, especially in childhood, especially when it made us feel vulnerable, needy, or too much. Because if you don't, those parts of you won't just disappear. They'll surface again and again through the people you date, the arguments you repeat, the heartbreaks that feel all too familiar. Let's pause here. Place a hand gently over your belly. Take a breath, not a big one, just enough. Feel the rise and fall. Let that breath be a message. You no longer need to fight for space. You already belong here. This journey back to the inner child is not regression. It's not weakness. It's reconnection. And when you hold that child's hand, your own hand, what once felt compulsive starts to soften. You no longer chase the ones who abandon you. You no longer tolerate the ones who confuse you. Because you've begun to realize the one who needed you most was always you. And when that part of you finally feels seen, the patterns loosen. The urgency fades. And the people you're drawn to begin to change, not because you've become better at dating, but because you've become better at loving the parts of you that no longer need to be rescued. That's the quiet revolution, and it begins with remembering you weren't broken. You were just learning how to survive in a world that didn't always know how to love you. But now you know. And knowing is enough to begin again. On your terms. There's a kind of person everyone seems to love. They're cheerful, funny, always upbeat, always fine. You may even be that person yourself, and if so, you know something the others don't. You know that the smile is often armor. That humor is sometimes a smoke signal. That cheerfulness can be a way of saying, please don't look too closely. I'm not sure what you'll find. Jung understood this dynamic deeply. To him, the persona, the mask we show the world, was often a carefully curated shield designed to hide the shadow. And nowhere is that dance more poignant than in the person who never seems to stop smiling. The smile isn't false. It's just incomplete. It's a well-rehearsed reflex, a learned response to pain, especially pain that wasn't safe to express. Perhaps you learned that if you were sad, you were a burden. If you were angry, you were too much. If you were afraid, you were weak, so you adapted. You smiled. You became the pleasant one, the helpful one, the positive one, and people praised you for it. They still do. But no one asks what it costs, because behind that effortless laugh may be a grief that's never been named. Behind the kind eyes may be a fatigue older than memory. Behind the patience may be a boundary that was never allowed. This is what Jung called shadow projection in reverse. You hide your pain, and instead of projecting it onto others as blame, you carry it inside as self-erasure. And what's worse, you attract people who benefit from your self-erasure. People who need you to stay upbeat. People who are comforted by your silence. People who are terrified of your depth, because if you show pain, they might have to face their own. Let's not be angry with them. Let's just be honest. You've been smiling for both of you for too long. Let's take a breath. Here, a real one. Inhale slowly. Feel your chest rise as if you're finally allowed to take up space. Exhale, as if your breath is the truth leaving your lips even if no one hears it. You're not here to entertain. You're here to exist. And the version of you who's always okay is tired. Let them rest. Because here's the strange grace of Jung's insight. The shadow, once befriended, loses its need to scream. And the smile, once freed from its duty, becomes real again. Not a mask, but a mirror of a soul at peace. That kind of joy, rooted in wholeness, not performance, is quieter, yes. Less dramatic, but it's sacred. And the people who are drawn to that kind of smile will be the ones who don't need you to hide anymore. So when the next laugh rises from your chest, let it be honest. Let it be imperfect. Let it be shared by both your light and your shadow, because when they laugh together, finally together, that's not coping, that's healing. Picture this: a quiet room, a single chair placed in the center facing you. There's no one sitting in it, but somehow it feels occupied. This is not a parlor trick. It's a therapeutic exercise from Gestalt psychology known as the empty chair technique, and it just so happens to be one of the most intimate ways to meet the part of yourself you've spent years ignoring. Jung may not have invented the method, but he understood its essence. He believed that healing doesn't happen just by insight, but through dialogue, especially with the shadowed, silenced parts of the self. So now imagine, in that chair sits a version of you that never gets to speak. Maybe it's the part that's still angry at what happened. Maybe it's the part that keeps asking why they left. Maybe it's the one who's still waiting to be chosen. even now. You've pushed them away for years, through productivity, through perfectionism, through smiling, through overgiving, through trying to be lovable by never being inconvenient. But they're still there, and they're not mad. They're just waiting. This is the moment to look at the chair and ask softly, "What have I not let you say?" And then, listen. Really, listen. Not with judgment, not with urgency, just with presence. The voice may be quiet at first, unpracticed. It might stammer, or rage, or tremble. That's okay. Let it speak. Because this is how the inner pattern begins to unravel, not by logic, but by permission. You can't intellectualize your way out of emotional patterns. You have to sit with them, face them, feel their loneliness, and slowly, gently, offer them a new ending. Let's try something small. Close your eyes if it feels safe. Picture your own face in that chair, not the adult one, but maybe a younger version. Ask them, "What do you wish I had known? What did you feel when we kept choosing people who didn't stay? What are you tired of pretending about?" There are no right answers, only real ones. This moment is not about fixing. It's about recognizing, and recognition is its own form of repair. Jung often said that we meet ourselves in the other, that every relationship is a mirror, but sometimes the reflection we need most is our own. Because when we don't give voice to our unspoken parts, we attract people who trigger them instead. We recreate the dynamic externally because we haven't yet resolved it internally. The empty chair becomes full the moment we turn toward it. And that fullness, however emotional, however raw, is sacred. It is the beginning of integration. It is where performance ends and presence begins. And when that neglected self finally feels heard, you may notice something subtle but profound. You stop needing others to fill that silence because you've learned how to sit in it without abandoning yourself. And that is emotional maturity, not perfection, not eternal happiness, but presence, depth, truth. The kind of truth that says, "I'm here now. I see you. I'm not leaving." Say it out loud if you want. You might be surprised who hears it, and finally answers back. You've seen it before, maybe even lived it. The mantra of modern self-help: just stay positive, good vibes only. Everything happens for a reason. It sounds harmless, encouraging even. But what if underneath all that brightness, there's a quiet violence? Jung wouldn't have called it optimism. He would have called it repression, because when positivity becomes a shield that denies grief, anger, fear, or pain, it ceases to be healing. It becomes avoidance dressed as strength. This is the heart of toxic positivity. It's the smile you force at a funeral, the "I'm fine" you whisper when your world is falling apart, the "just move on" you tell yourself, again and again and again, until even your emotions give up trying to reach you. And the cost? Your body knows the truth you've silenced. Your breath shortens, your jaw tightens. You wake up tired from carrying the weight of what you've never allowed yourself to feel. This is where unconscious patterns find fertile ground. Because if you only permit yourself to feel half the emotional spectrum, you'll be drawn, over and over again, to people who mirror that imbalance. People who can't meet you in sadness. People who flinch when you speak truth. People who love the light in you, but abandon the shadow. You may think you're protecting others by staying positive, but often you're protecting yourself from the vulnerability of being real. Let's pause for a breath. Not a perfect breath, just an honest one. Inhale. Hold. Exhale with the sound of relief, not performance. Now ask yourself, have I confused strength with suppression? Have I mistaken denial for growth? Because real strength isn't about always being okay. It's about being safe enough to say when you're not. Jung taught that the psyche longs for wholeness, not just light, not just shadow. Both. When you suppress your shadow emotions, they don't disappear. They go underground, And they grow. They leak out in sarcasm, in distance, in anxiety, in attraction to people who feel stable only because they too are emotionally unavailable. This is the cost of never saying, "I'm hurting." You keep inviting people into your life who never notice that you're bleeding, but when you allow yourself to feel everything, the grief, the rage, the disappointment, the fear, you become real. And when you're real, the people who only want the mask leave. Let them. Because someone else is watching. Someone who has been waiting not for your smile, but for your honesty. Not for your perfection, but for your depth, and that someone might just be you. Let's take one more breath. A full one this time. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Let it carry with it the weight of every "I'm fine" you didn't mean, because you're not here to be fine. You're here to be whole. And wholeness begins the moment you stop pretending that sunshine is the only season your heart is allowed to live in. You've met them. The person who lights up a room, whose laughter disarms the tense, whose energy seems to lift everyone else's. They're the sun, the joy, the comic relief, and they rarely, if ever, talk about themselves. They're everyone's favorite person, but no one really knows them. Maybe that person is you. If so, here's something Jung would quietly offer. The brightest light often casts the longest shadow. We assume that those who are most cheerful are also most carefree, but often that joy is forged in fire. Not as a gift from a happy sun life, but as a survival mechanism from a painful one. Humor becomes a language, laughter becomes armor, and being the light becomes a job, one that no one asked you to take, but you signed the contract anyway. Not out of ego, out of protection. Maybe as a child you were the peacemaker. You learned to sense moods, diffuse tension, say the right thing. You discovered that if you could make others laugh, they wouldn't leave. That if you never showed need, no one would reject you for being too much. You became skilled, sharp, quick, beloved. But inside, a quiet truth was growing. No one sees me. They see what I do. They love the light I give, but not the dark I hide. Jung would recognize this as a fractured integration of the self and persona, when who you are has become completely eclipsed by what others need you to be. The danger? You attract people who don't just accept your mask, they depend on it. People who feed off your radiance, but go silent when you dim. People who praise your strength but disappear the moment you ask for help, and you let it slide. You smile. You say it's fine, because saying otherwise would require a risk you're not sure you're allowed to take. Being seen without entertaining. Being held without performing. Being loved without giving first. Let's breathe together now, gently in, hold, and out, not with a smile but with a sigh. That's it. What if the thing you think you have to earn was always yours to begin with? What if the love you've been crafting through service could exist, simply because you exist? No stage, no jokes, no being the strong one, just you. As is. That kind of honesty is terrifying. But it's also sacred, because when you finally let yourself fall apart, just a little, you begin to find out who's really there for you. Not just around you, for you, and more importantly, you begin to show up for yourself. That's when the pain begins to shift, not because it disappears, but because it's no longer something you're carrying alone. And over time, you may notice that your laughter starts to change. It softens, it deepens. It's no longer sharp-edged or self-protective. It becomes true joy, not reaction, not mask, expression. Because you've stopped using joy to hide pain, and started allowing both to exist in the same breath. That's not weakness, that's wholeness, and it's yours now. Even if no one else sees it yet, you do. It's an irony few talk about. You bring light, and the world applauds. You stay optimistic, and the world leans on you. You smile through it all, and the world assumes you have nothing to cry about. And so, you learn a cruel, unspoken truth. The more together you seem, the fewer people ask if you're okay. It's not that they're malicious. They just can't imagine that the one who makes them feel safe might be the one going home to silence. Jung saw this phenomenon clearly. What the collective admires, it also misunderstands. He believed the persona, the outward identity we build, to function in society, eventually becomes a contract of invisibility. The more efficient the mask, the more complete the erasure of what's behind it. This is especially true in relationships. You're the rock, the stable one, the one who never asks for much. And because you've made it easy to be loved, conditionally few ever think to ask what you need in return. Here's the hard part. You've trained the world to treat you this way, not because you're manipulative, because you learned, early and well, that visibility often led to rejection. So you became invisible in your needs. You became known for being low maintenance, agreeable, emotionally steady. But that identity, while convenient for others, has a cost because the more roles you fill, the more roles you attract. Caretakers attract the broken, listeners attract the loud, peacemakers attract chaos. And before long, your relationships stop feeling mutual. They start feeling like unpaid emotional labor. Let's breathe here. A long, slow breath. Let your exhale carry out the last 5 times you said yes when you meant not really. Now ask yourself, do I feel loved or do I feel useful? Because the difference is everything. You don't need to abandon your warmth, your generosity, your light. But you do need to know this. Your worth is not in how easy you are to be around. It's not in how little space you take. It's not in how well you absorb the moods of others. Your worth is in your wholeness, messy, honest, flawed, feeling, whole. So when someone says, "You're always so happy," you don't need to correct them. But you can ask yourself, do they know me, or do they only know the version I've curated? For their comfort? That's not bitterness. That's self-respect. Because the world will always love the one who smiles. But few are prepared to love the one who weeps behind that smile. It's not your job to make others comfortable. It's your job to be real. And sometimes being real means letting yourself be disappointed. Letting yourself need more than you're used to asking for. Letting yourself be seen. You are not selfish for wanting reciprocity. You are not difficult for wanting depth. You are not broken for being tired. You are just human. And that's enough. Even when the world doesn't say it, you can say it. So tonight, if no one's ever told you this, you don't have to earn rest. You don't have to smile your way to love. You don't have to shrink to be cherished. You just have to stop disappearing inside your own life and begin gently to reappear. There's a strange silence that falls the first time you say no and mean it. The first time you don't explain yourself. The first time you choose discomfort over pretending. It's not loud, but it's seismic. And perhaps more importantly, it's the moment the pattern starts to break. You've spent years being liked, admired even. The one who understands, the one who adjusts, the one who softens conflict before it begins. It's not that you're fake. It's that somewhere along the way, you mistook peacekeeping for connection. And over time, being the nice one became less about who you are and more about who people expect you to be. Carl Jung would call this the inflated persona, a mask worn not just to relate to others but to survive them. And when you wear it long enough, something subtle happens. You begin to attract people who need you to stay small, to stay agreeable, to stay quiet when your truth would make things complicated. But here's what no one tells you. Being nice can be a trauma response. It can be a survival strategy from a childhood where anger was dangerous, or a relationship where boundaries were punished, or a world where being too much got you left behind. You learned that harmony equals safety, that making others comfortable was how you earned your place. And so, you kept smiling. You kept, giving. You kept showing up even when you were empty, especially when you were empty. Let's pause here. Take a breath in. Feel your belly rise, not your chest, your belly. Now let the exhale be an offering, not to anyone else, just to yourself. That breath doesn't need to please anyone. Now imagine this. You say what you really think. You express your actual feelings. You hold a boundary without guilt. What happens? Do they leave? Do they get angry? Do they accuse you of changing? If so, that's not love leaving you. That's control losing its grip. And it's not your responsibility to mourn it. When you stop being the person who's always there, you find out who was only staying because you were convenient. It hurts, but it also heals, because as long as you're playing a role, you'll never feel truly loved, only approved of, and approval fades the moment you step out of character. But love, real love, survives the truth. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, required sacrifice. And often, what must be sacrificed is the persona. Not because it's evil, because it's incomplete. You are allowed to be loud, to be clear, to be complex, to be inconsistent, to need, to rest, to disappoint people who only loved your silence. And when you stop trying to be nice, you make space for kindness, for honesty, for the kind of connections that don't collapse under the weight of your real self. So tonight, if your voice trembles when you speak your truth, let it tremble. That is strength, not the tremble, the speaking. And if someone leaves because of it, they were only there for the version of you that was easier to manage. Let them go, so that you can stay with you. Carl Jung once worked with a woman who smiled constantly, not politely, not nervously, but fully, brightly, brilliantly. To anyone observing, she seemed the picture of composure, even happiness. She smiled through every session. She smiled when talking about her childhood. She smiled when describing the moment her fiancé left her without warning. Jung noticed something unusual. Her face never changed, but her hands trembled. When he asked about her feelings, she shrugged. "It doesn't bother me anymore," she said, still smiling. But Jung didn't believe her words. He believed her body. He believed the twitch in her fingers, the tightness in her jaw, the pauses between words where grief lived like a ghost. So he gently said to her, "Your smile is very loyal. I wonder who you made that promise to." And in that moment, she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Like a statue beginning to remember it was once flesh. She began to cry, not because of him, but because someone had finally seen the grief behind the performance. This is what Jung understood so well. Not all trauma looks like chaos. Some of it looks like control. Smiling, thriving, achieving, never burdening anyone with your pain. It's called functional suffering. You get things done. You stay pleasant. You manage well. And inside, you're crumbling. This is why people like that smiling woman, maybe like you, rarely get help. Because no one thinks they need it. They're not falling apart. They're excelling. But Jung knew that adaptation is not healing. You can live with the wound so long you begin to build your whole life around it. You call it resilience. You wear it like armor. You hand it out as proof. "See? I'm fine. Look how well I carry this." But the wound doesn't disappear. It just waits for silence. So tonight, let's create some. Turn your focus inward. Feel your breath. Slow, full. Let the inhale bring curiosity. Let the exhale make space for what might arise. Now ask softly, is there a part of me I've made promise never to cry again? If something stirs, honor it. That's not weakness. That's memory knocking. Because buried in every overfunctioning adult is a child who wasn't allowed to feel. A child who learned that being lovable meant being low maintenance, that being wanted meant never being inconvenient. But healing isn't about becoming lovable. It's about remembering you always were. The smile protected you when no one else did. Let's thank it. Let's honor it. And when you're ready, let it soften. Not forever, just for now. Just enough to let something else speak. Because there is a deeper joy. One that doesn't depend on performance. And it begins the moment you stop smiling out of habit and start feeling from the place that never forgot how. It doesn't start with a breakthrough. It doesn't begin with a revelation or a spiritual awakening or some grand final goodbye. It begins smaller, quieter, with a frown, not an angry one, a curious one, a tired one, a true one. Maybe you're standing in front of the mirror, Maybe someone asks you for just one more favor. Maybe you're alone in bed, and you suddenly notice how clenched your jaw has been for days. And without realizing it, your face changes. The smile drops. The shoulders lower, and you think, I don't want to do this anymore. That's the moment Jung would have told you to watch closely, because that's the first flicker of self-contact. That small frown isn't just a reaction. It's a rebellion, not against the world, but against the version of you that has kept the peace at your own expense. You're not being rude. You're being real. And that may be the most radical thing you've done all year. Because here's what you realize. Every time you've said yes to stay likable, you've said no to your truth. And every time you smiled to keep someone comfortable, you left yourself out in the cold. And now, you're done. This doesn't mean you become harsh. It doesn't mean you stop being kind. It means your kindness is no longer a form of self-erasure. It means your generosity now has roots in choice, not in fear. You're no longer the person who must hold everyone else together. You're the person who's finally holding yourself. And it started with a frown. A moment where the mask slipped, and you didn't rush to fix it. You let it fall. You let the silence linger. You let the discomfort teach you something. This is what individuation looks like, not becoming someone else but reclaiming the self that was buried beneath expectation. So now, when you meet someone new, you don't rush to smile. You notice your body. You ask yourself, do I feel open and or obligated? Am I being chosen or being useful? You start to recognize your old patterns not as destiny, but as echoes, ones you no longer have to answer. Let's breathe into that. Inhale, I am allowed to change. Exhale, I don't have to prove anything. Again. Slower. This isn't the end of the pattern, but it is the beginning of your part in it ending. And over time, with practice, something unexpected happens. You stop attracting the same kind of person. You stop replaying the same emotional scripts. You stop hoping someone else will give you permission to rest, because you've started giving it to yourself, and no one can take that from you. So when you feel that first frown creeping in, don't rush to replace it. Let it stay. Let it speak. It might be your real self, finally saying, I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. And now we rest. You've walked through layers tonight, patterns, masks, echoes of the past still living in your present. Maybe for the first time, you've seen yourself not as broken, but as repeating. Not as dramatic, but as unfinished. And maybe, just maybe, you felt something loosen. You don't have to fix it all right now. You don't have to figure it all out before morning. That was never the assignment. The goal was to notice. Because the moment you see the pattern, you are no longer trapped inside it. So let's exhale together. Slowly. As if putting down a burden that was never yours to carry. You don't need to perform to be wanted. You don't need to please to be kept. You don't need to shrink in order to be safe. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to frown. You are allowed to rest. Let your body sink just a little deeper now. Let your breath slow. Let your mind drift if it wants to. The healing has already begun. And as you fade into sleep, remember this. There is nothing wrong with you. There never was. You were simply becoming conscious. End of script. Sweet dreams.